Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining Inform's NCSU chapter. Today, we have a special guest from Resilinc, Jon Bovit. He is a managing director and he is heading the business development and marketing aspects from Resilinc. Let me introduce the author before we go for today's presentation. So Jon has done his bachelor's in computer systems and master's in information management. He worked with various corporations, right from Oracle, then Ariba, followed by these Resilinc, and then he came back with again Resilinc in the last 3 years ago. He came back to Resilinc. So he has taken care of business developments with the different corporations. He has promoted various applications and brought new customers to the business. And many of you are aware of Resilinc. Resilinc is into supply chain risk management software platform. So before COVID-19, in fact, when in December 2020, last year, when Wuhan was affected by this COVID cases, Resilinc was one of the top companies that time. They were very advanced. They were taking care of noting this event. They informed all their well-established industrial key accounts and customers so that this risk is going to affect the entire global supply chain. By the end of March 2020, the entire world is declared based on this spread of this coronavirus. So all the customers from Resilinc actually know that, okay, they are well aware that this risk is going to affect them. So Resilinc is primarily into risk prediction and using those data entire globe, how we can mitigate those risks and stuff. So today, Jon is going to give a basic idea and explanation about what is exactly resilience in supply chain, how supply chain risk can be mitigated, and he is going to also give one demo using Resilinc as a software. So those people who are interested in supply chain risk management, this is your time. And if you have any doubts in between, feel free to ask any questions. If not, probably you can just put the questions in the chat window. So before I hand it over to Jon, I request all people, if you can open your cameras, your shutters, we will have a group photograph. I think, Jon, you need to unshare again because we are going to take a group picture. If you share the screen, we won't.
Oh, okay. Oh, thank you. All right. Let me.
All right. Zoo, on your count. Let's give 1 minute. People can open up. Okay, I can see Melissa here. Hi, Melissa. All right, take the picture.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Jon. I think you can start the presentation now. Thanks a lot.
Okay. No problem. Well, hello, everyone. Let me, there it is. Share. And so thanks, Srinivasan. Appreciate the kind introduction. Thanks, everyone, for joining today. And just appreciate virtually meeting. Maybe I actually do live in Cary in the Raleigh area, so it would be nice to meet face to face. I'm sure a lot of people feel that way, not just me. But again, so Jon Bovit with Resilinc, and I was going to walk you through a talk today and about what we're seeing in the supply chain risk management, road to resilience, and how companies are leveraging supply chain to build a more resilient company, and what are some of the challenges and so forth. And then as Srinivasan mentioned, I will give a quick demo and then we can take some questions, okay? So with that, I will jump right in. So, it's interesting to look at supply chain resiliency and supply chain risk management from a historic perspective. It really does go back to the dawn of humanity. If you look at it couldn't have been any battles if they didn't have horseshoes. They didn't have the saddles or the weapons or whatever. So it really is a very old problem. In fact, even the multi-tier supply chain, which we'll talk about and why that's important and why it became, one of the hottest topics right now, even with President Biden in an executive order talking about the importance of supply chains. We can really see how it's really coming to the forefront. But if you take a look and kind of analyze for any historic issue, there was not only the suppliers that were involved, but the sub-tier supply, the next tier down. So this whole concept was really going back, since the dawn of civilization. If you really think about the importance and why it's now, in the heart of now we're starting to come out of COVID, thank the Lord, but it really has brought these issues to the forefront. Oops. So did I get that? Yeah. So, and the interesting thing is that it wasn't that these issues haven't been important, as you can see, going back even thousands of years. But COVID, the COVID crisis around the globe really solidified this as a critical issue. It was exposing all of us have literally been impacted by supply chains over the last year, whether it's you can't get your oven fixed because you can't get critical parts, or you couldn't get toilet paper for a while, or you couldn't get anything. Certain things were coming from areas of the world that were impacted by shortages and by the situation at hand, whether it was because companies couldn't get materials they needed. And that really illustrated a lot of this, but it really hit home that a lot of companies were significantly impacted. And in fact, governments as well. And as Srinivasan mentioned in the introduction, Resilinc has really been, I believe, at the forefront. Our founder and CEO, Bindia Vakil, was really, I remember distinctly, even earlier, maybe around in January of last year, she recognized that the potential of impact that this could have. And eventually we saw the great impacts. And throughout the last year, we've been consistently coming out, helping our clients, but also helping the public and hospital systems and just lots of different companies and organizations, including the government, understand the impacts, understand whatever industry you're particularly in, there was a lot of different impacts, whether it was a shock to demand, things would springboard up and down, whether inventories were getting low or you couldn't fill them, as we talked about, whether suppliers would say, well, we can't fill your orders 100%, we'll fill them partially, and whether it could be lines down. And ultimately, a lot of companies, because of this, whether it's the demand side or the supply side, took a big hit in terms of revenue. Some industries actually did well, right? Improved because they were on one side of the equation. But some, such as transportation, such as the travel industry, entertainment industry, really took a big hit. Automotive, obviously had a big impact. So, and then more recently, it's coming out around the global chip shortage, but its roots were way back in the beginning, even going back before COVID. There were obviously issues in the supply chain, and COVID really exacerbated those issues. So all of the, if you look at, and each industry, if you look at from high tech and automotive and semiconductor, med device, life care, health, food and consumer goods, were all impacted, but all impacted in different ways. Some demand went up, some supply, demand went down, so forth. So, but it was definitely a very broad impact, and I think we've all experienced it and continue, obviously. So, if you take a look at kind of this whole idea of, well, over the years, globalization has obviously, we all are familiar with how different companies have moved things offshore, whether it was to India, to China, or Europe, or others from the US over, or vice versa. But the whole, you get into this argument of, is it nearshore? Do you want to then bring things back? And now that's starting to come full circle. But what basically what we're seeing is that whether you go, you move globally and move your supply chains, away from you or bring them back towards you, it's still important to understand where the supply chain, where are the things? Are you nearshoring? Are you offshoring? Regardless, understanding the supply chain and the multiple tiers where the dependents are is the important thing. And I think that's one of the things that have really come out over a period of time, is that if you don't understand where your dependencies are, in other words, I get material, I do buy from a local distributor, but they get the supplies, from South Korea or somewhere. If they can't get it because of the transportation systems are down, whether the suppliers themselves have workforce issues because of COVID, they can't get to the factory. But whatever the issues are, there's all these interconnections, and there was a lot of companies struggled, whether it was via the inventory or whatever it was. But the whole idea is understand the supply chain. That became the core critical issue, I think. And the whole idea is to build more visibility. And a lot of companies were really taken by surprise when they thought they had the local supplier. What they didn't realize was their supplier, or their supplier was based in, let's say, Wuhan, China, or somewhere that had immediate impacts. And even think about the impacts to Italy very early on because of their relationship with China, how fast things spread. And you really get a feel for how fast everything got locked down. And a lot of companies were really taken by surprise. And, the whole idea, I think one of the key lessons learned that I think everybody can kind of walk away from is, build more transparency into your supply chain. In other words, map where the connections and the dependencies are, monitor for things going on, automate collection of supplier information so that you can make decisions, and allow you to build more flexibility. And what I think, if anybody will tell you anything, having more knowledge, more information will help you reduce risk. And I think everybody can really agree about that. Now, one of the things that Resilinc focuses in on is this idea of monitoring. Now, what is, I don't know if anybody, monitors the news like we do, but, there's constantly factory fires, earthquakes, cyber threats, all of these things that are going on around the world. And it's not necessarily good enough to just know that those things are going on. It's how does it impact the company or the organization you're involved in? A lot of times it's difficult to understand if there's something that happens, somewhere. Let's just use China as an example. If something happens in China, if it's a factory fire or just a labor dispute or something happens, but how does that eventually cascade and impact me? So it's not only understanding that it occurred and detecting and sensing that, but then how does that impact me? And that's the challenge. And that's what Resilinc, one of the things that Resilinc is really focused in on and gotten very effective at is understanding across, hundreds of, countries and across 100 different languages, what's happening in the world. And then how does that actually impact a company such as, our customers. And it's really understanding down to the, what happened, the products, down to the products, the parts, the sites, the suppliers, the sub-tier suppliers, and how does that eventually impact me? And if you keep taking this down to its conclusion, really what you're trying to do is detect these issues that are going on around the world, again, whether they're floods, coronavirus, cyber threat, whatever it is, and analyzing the impact, getting the suppliers to confirm whether they've been impacted or not, and then using all that information to then protect the supply chain, understand and mitigate those problems. And then that's kind of one side of it. And then there's another side of it. That's sort of what we call the react, workflow, or the reaction, be able to quickly react, but from a detection on down. And then, but there's a whole idea around being able to be proactive in terms of having this information in one central place, so I can look for weaknesses in my supply chain, high risk areas, hotspots, and proactively. You can't fix all risks, right? I mean, risks are always going to be there. We all know that. You do your best to use information and other techniques to mitigate and protect the supply chain, such as inventory and other things. But you can't fix everything. It would be too prohibitively expensive. But what you could do is use that information to proactively look for, identify risks, prioritize, and then mitigate over a period of time. So you use that information on your behalf to mitigate risks that could potentially happen. So there's the reactive kind of workflow and the proactive workflow. And this is a hard slide to read, but just to let you know, these are the events that happen this is 1 week. I meant what week this was, but there was, in 1 week here, there was 202 events, 2 severe, 101 medium, and 99 low. But even the low, what we consider low, could still impact a company. There could be some labor dispute or a flood or a recall or something that, almost all, the reason that we report them and track them and monitor them is they could be impactful, even something low that we consider low. So this is just 1 week. And this morning, there was a big earthquake. I saw there's just constantly things going on, and how that impacts supply chains can be very significant. And as I mentioned, our solution, that whether you're using, we have a mobile app, which is what you're seeing sort of here on a flow, but it could be also via the website of the web app as well. But the whole idea is to just, even with my phone, I can literally grab my phone and do this, but you can detect, will automatically notify our customers that something occurred. You can see it on your smartphone, via the app. You can then drill all the way through and see what the impact was from a product or part or site or revenue, the area of impact, diagnose that. Suppliers also get automatically communicated these issues from Resilinc, so they can then respond and just say, hey, no, I'm not impacted, or yes, I am. They can confirm impact. We can gather all that information. You can actually see, which suppliers confirm, which ones didn't. And then you can actually message suppliers. So you can say, hey, can you confirm or deny whether you've been impacted? If so, if you've been impacted, tell me, what happened. How long will you be out? So again, it really automates the collection, analysis, and taking action on these. And then I can then really easily communicate with the rest of my team on my side, just to automate and create a quick response. And I can show you this in the demo as well, but just sort of shows a flow. And what we're finding now is that it's not always, a lot of times we have different ways that we actually gather this data. A lot of times, people will say to me, customers that we talk to, and say, "Hey, John, this is great, but how do you actually, how do you actually get this data?" And I said, "Well, that's a good question." So we have a model where we can collect the data from suppliers, so they can publish the information once and then share it to other Resilinc customers, or we can actually do the mapping without the suppliers. It's what we call kind of the public data research. And then, or we can just, leverage supplier sites only. We can do the sub tiers without contacting the suppliers. And then we can do that all from, as I mentioned, all from public data mining, if you will. But the whole idea is to create as much, if you go back to my earlier concepts, it was around getting as much visibility as we can, as fast as we can, because knowing something is out there is better than not knowing, I guess is the way to look at it. And a lot of times we actually see issues are brought up, or what we call myths, that people will think about and they'll say, well, suppliers will never provide this information, John. And I'm like, no, that's not true. We collect at a very high rate. Suppliers will provide this information. And often they do. And even if they don't, there's data that we can get on them without them providing, but they often do provide. Another myth would be, hey, John, we need an army of people to do this. And again, that's really not true. We've built this capability and infrastructure, we've built this capability and infrastructure to be very democratic, to make it very easy to capture the data, to automate, and doesn't need a lot of people, nor is it necessarily super expensive. We've made it scalable so that smaller companies and suppliers can participate, larger companies can participate, and we also tried to shrink the time it takes to actually do it, to get value at it. Even if you're doing a little bit of this or a lot of it, you can still get a good return on your investment. Excuse me. And there's a build here. There we go. So the whole idea is, when you're, and I'll demo this too, build it out. Oops. So the whole idea is to understand and map the supply chain network so that I can see the hotspots, where the dependencies are, and drill down and around to get lots of data and lots of information at the speed of a click. And I'll show you this in a demo, but the whole idea is to make it really easy to understand, diagnose, as I mentioned, and also combine where my supply chain is to where the events are around the world. And that's the key to why understand this, so you can understand, again, those dependencies. And the key to understanding supply chains is to know that there's so many interdependencies. Risk can concentrate and infiltrate lots of different areas, and often, and in particular, as I mentioned, all of us experienced this during the COVID lockdowns, where there was something you didn't do without, I'm sure. Whether it was you had trouble getting paper goods or whatever it was, but we've all experienced it. And so those were actually showing sub-tier supply chain problems. It wasn't necessarily that your supplier, the supermarket, couldn't get it, didn't have it, they couldn't get them, and maybe it's their suppliers, their distributors, they couldn't get it. So it actually went through the supply chain. And thus there was hidden failure points that, in fact, very early on, even things like aspirin and other things, were at risk to be shortages, because they were, the source of them ultimately was, they were manufactured in China or other areas. India is another area that does a lot of manufacturing, and because transportation routes were closed, regional areas were locked down. There was definitely impacts, and it cascaded throughout, as we talked about. Okay. And one of the things that because we understood and mapped these supply chains even before COVID, we were able to, because a lot of this mapping and work and everything were all done before COVID, we were able to help our customers avoid problems. In fact, we've actually had customers present to us how Resilinc helped them through the COVID crisis. And it was really nice. And there's been public articles, and you can read lots of them, such as General Motors or IBM or Bose or others that have come out and talked about how they were able to avoid disruptions, and Resilinc has helped them. And so we had, in particular, and actually this was an example of a customer that actually presented to Resilinc internally to explain to us how we helped them, which was really a neat experience. And this was a semiconductor company that had mapped quite a bit. They were a user of Resilinc for a number of years. They got all the way down to the knowledge of where their 7,500 parts and materials came from. They were able to look at where, as the COVID lockdowns were occurring, during the last year, they were able to look at, and I'll show you this in the demo, look at their supply chain, where the dependencies are, and they were actually able to avoid customer facing problems or delivery problems. And that's key, because don't forget, you can't recognize revenue or generate revenue if you can't deliver to your customers. They pay you when you give them stuff. So the whole idea around this supply chain is really, protecting revenue ultimately. So this is a really interesting case study, and I think you'll see as we, I'll go into a demo in a little bit, and you can see how it works. Now, as I mentioned, being able to improve visibility really helps to build a more transparent world, have everyone understand where the issues are and the dependencies are, and you build a more resilient supply chain, and ultimately a more resilient world from whether it's an individual company, organization, their customer and value chain, across the board. So another question that we often see is around, well, hey, John, or Resilinc, depending on who they're talking to, can I stay lean and still operate a global supply chain and be resilient? And the answer is yes. Really, because, and this is where understanding you can be a lean organization, lower costs, obviously build more profit margin, but still be resilient. And how you do that is better use of information technology and the data and the transparency, as we talked about. And a lot of times what you want to do is understand like where the risk is. And when you're sourcing and doing other efforts, understand where, in some cases, if it's a high revenue impact versus low impact, or where is it a high revenue area, whatever the kind of things fall, if it's, it doesn't cost you much and it interacts with a lot of revenue, or it depends on a lot of revenue, you may multi-source. Sometimes in a lot of industries, having, dual sources or multiple sources for a given, part or product is literally impossible. It's so specialized that you work with that supplier for years to certify that it's correct, and thus you're fully dependent on them. But you can still do things to work with them and get the data to understand and protect them. And that's what this is. There could be a sole source, single source, multi-source, dual source, model, but still in each one of those classifications, there's still things you can do to protect yourself, protect the revenue, protect your customers. And the whole idea, as we talked about, is, and this is where, when you start looking at the technology underpinnings of the things that we're talking about and building more resilience, is even AI, machine learning, some of these advanced data science, some of these advanced technologies and techniques that we've built out, the technology and the data, is there helping us not only understand where the problems are, but predicting where the problems would be. And even years ago, I remember talking to very senior executives at companies, one in particular, a meeting where the chief procurement officer said, I want to know where problems are before they occur, because when they occur, it's too late. And that's, the whole idea behind being predicting where problems could be, and then saying, okay, if I know where those problems could be, I can then take action or be ready for them. And the whole idea of being able to predict, understand, and prescribe, targeted actions, understand where the connections are. I can then take proactive steps to preempt these problems. And then once I see that feedback loop, I can then learn over time and adapt better. So it's sort of this loop of, understanding feedback loop, understanding reaction feedback loop. And that's the whole idea. And, the idea where the return on investment really builds on itself. It comes from things like reduced time for monitoring how much work there is, to understanding the impact to inventory, buffers, things like that. And you really start to see a build of the return on investment from things like, if I don't know where the risks are and risks occur, I have to expedite freight. If I see a shortage, I may have to pay a premium for those products or parts or materials or services. So those are the types of kind of levers that help drive the return on investment, but they're huge, and we're seeing those today. So, the whole idea of, what's stopping more and more companies, including, even the government and everywhere, different governments around the world, is adoption. It's really, taking advantage of these technologies, the data that's available, and these approaches to build a more resilient, let's face it, if we were more resilient in our supply chain, what about for masks and personal protective equipment and gowns for hospitals, masks for all of us? And if we had all of that information, and capability, maybe we wouldn't have had all these shortages, thinking back. So I think with that, I'll take a pause if there's any questions before I get into the demonstration.
Any questions from the participants? You can unmute yourself, or you can put the question on the chat window.
Just in this slide, what is adoption?
So adoption is a good question. So adoption is customers actually deploying these techniques, and actually leveraging the capability. So it's adopting these capabilities.
John, I have a question. I mean, when you collect data from across the globe from different regions, both political, economic, social, and other aspects of the business environment, how actually you capture those data? Is that your software or your system follows newspaper articles, or some kind of internet articles where you apply some machine learning techniques to pick up those information, and then you apply some kind of multi-criteria decision making, calculating the weightages to finally arrive at the scores? Is that right?
Yeah. So there's as I go through the demo, you'll see, obviously this whole thing is very analytical and lots of data at different places. The data only comes from a few different sources. The news and these alerts that you see come from actually millions of sources. It can be, public, private, government, websites. It can be social media. It can be lots of different sources around the news. We actually monitor, like I said, I think it's hundreds of thousands of sources, roughly 50 million bits of data a month, news articles a month. And then the supplier information you see only comes from a few sources. It could come from Resilinc that we produce this data. It can be collected from the suppliers themselves. It can be provided by other third parties if there's other elements of risk. So it only, the data only comes from a few different places. It comes from Resilinc, it comes from the customer, it comes from the supplier mostly. And then there's other data that we can load in, from like Dun & Bradstreet or Rapid Ratings or EcoVadis for sustainability. There's these other data sources.
Oh, thanks.
Sure. So you can still see my screen, or?
Yes, it is visible.
Okay, good. I'll be demoing for 15 minutes and wasn't showing the whole time. Okay. So so the whole idea is to put all that information at a user's fingertips. And what you're seeing, a few things will jump out at you right away. One is that I have a news feed that I can scroll through. It also comes to my phone. I get them via email, or I can see them right here in the application. I can see a geographic view. I can layer in different information right here. I can drill into very specific points on a map and get into particular data if I'd like. I can drill in, if I want to go and see particular sites anywhere in the world. Eventually I keep uncovering different, eventually I drill in, I can see different points, which these actually represent physical locations. In this case, a supplier. I can see that this is a component supplier to me. They perform manufacturing, and I actually get 2 sole source parts, 1 single sort, and for a total of 27 parts I do get. And obviously this is in Japan. So again, I can get this visualization, easily interact. I can drill up. I can also layer on the actual events that are going on. You can see there was a probably heard a little while ago, there was forget when this was, but there was a 7.0 earthquake in Japan. But I can start to see all the different events that are going on around the world, whether it was a China port congestion ahead of the New Year holiday. Again, I can just see all these things, going on around the world, compared layered on top of my supply chain. So if I keep scrolling down, it's also telling me, some information that I should react to. So as an example, it's highlighting that I have 2 events where suppliers have actually confirmed impact, which means that that's something I should take a look at. So I'll take a look at that in a minute. If I keep scrolling down, now there's this whole element of risk quantification. In other words, where are my risks? I have, suppliers. I have my overall supply. What we call suppliers partners. So overall supplier risk. And by the way, any numbers that you see are on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being low risk, 10 being high risk. So overall, my risk is right in the middle. But individual suppliers would obviously be different. I have some suppliers that are, getting better or improving, and some that are getting worse. And I can, start to get other data points. But the other thing that I can do is look at the events. As I mentioned, there was events that occurred. There was a fire, and these are real alerts, by the way. There was a fire at a metal processing plant in Germany, in Berlin. There was an earthquake in Greece, and you can see that these actually did have an impact. I can see that how many supplier sites, the event type. So I did open up, let me see if I can move this out of the way. And then when I click on a particular event, I get brought to what we refer to as the war room. So this is a virtual environment or virtual war room where everybody can actually get the information. I can see a summary, which suppliers have confirmed, I can see one supplier for one site has actually confirmed impact. I can see in this table down here how many products, sub-tier suppliers, sub-tier sites, products, parts, and revenues potentially impacted by this event. I can see the different activity that's going on. I can see the material flow, the infected region. I can see here's the particular supplier. I can drill into that. And if they've confirmed impact, that they've actually confirmed 2 weeks of impact due to damage from an equipment. So it's just giving me lots of information. I can keep scrolling down and see which sites have been impacted, what activities they perform. I can get all the way down to, here's all the different parts that were, and actually single source parts that were impacted here. Again, all the way down to the specific details. Okay. Now, the other thing I can do, I can use this information to communicate internally. If I scroll all the way up, we have this actual feature around collaboration. Remember, I said one of the things you want to be able to do is actually collaborate. Sorry, I keep having this little bar problem here. Okay. I can say, at here, and just say like, what is the status? And this could be, I could be communicating with internally or with someone externally, but this is the whole idea is the collaboration element of this. I can also initiate workflow. In other words, there are certain actions and tasks that we need to do to automatically respond or methodically respond to this. And so I can have that all set. We have this kind of workflow capability. And then the whole idea too, as I mentioned, is to put all this information and provide some analytics this happens to be at the supplier level. These are all the historic events that have impacted the supplier. The other thing I can do is I can look at that supplier's network. In other words, where they are in the supply chain and what that looks like, what their supply chain footprint is, where their dependencies are. And again, it's that whole idea of increasing visibility of this particular supplier and being able to see, what some of the details are. I can look at their risk analytics for this given supplier. So all of this information is sort of at my, at my fingertips. I'll let that build out. But you can see how I can see risk quantification over time, how it's changed over time. I can see where the different elements of risk are. I can see this is not a very high risk supplier. I can see what risk scores are there, which is over here. So I can see different analytics. I can see where they are. This happens to be a tier 1 supplier, but I actually get lots of different parts, including single source parts. So this is a supplier I should keep an eye on. Okay. And then finally, the other thing that we want to be able to do, as I mentioned, is understand the multi-tier elements of the supply chain. In other words, I can see we're highlighting different areas of risk, concentration of risk. Actually, the blue dots are sub-tiers, the green dots are tier 1 suppliers. So I can start to see and highlight whether it's in a hierarchical table where the sub-tiers are. I can see where the risk is concentrating. So in other words, this supplier TMC is a supplier to me, but it's also a supplier to 13 other suppliers in the sub-tier. So if I was to lose this supplier, it would have a huge cascading effect on my business. So it's highlighting that I should take a look at these, again, prioritizing and illuminating the different supply areas. And then I could also see, where my risk is. Again, obviously, I have a lot of suppliers in the United States, China, Taiwan, Germany, and I can see, how that kind of rolls out. I can see them by tier and so forth. So I guess I'll pause there. Any questions?
Hey, I have a question over
How are we
here.
doing on time? Okay. Yep.
So do you have any customers who mandate their suppliers to use your software so that you can automatically integrate the data that's being available?
Yeah, that's a great question. Do we have customers that have mandated suppliers comply? The answer is yes. I would say that's a best practice, but I think a lot of companies don't necessarily mandate it, because they really can't mandate it. But over time, they start to mandate it more and more, and weed out the suppliers that won't participate, and make that an area for suppliers to do. But I would say it's some customers I have seen mandate it. It's definitely not the norm, but I would say it's a leading practice, a best practice.
All right, thank you.
John, quick question with respect to competition. I mean, I know there is a company called riskmethods.com. They are also into same supply chain risk monitoring and calculating scores so that they have their environment. So in what sense or in how this Resilinc is superior than the competition products?
Well, yeah, we're definitely superior. So I'll just say that. But yeah, we do obviously have competition. I think where we differentiate is we've been doing this the longest. We've been around this is actually our 11th year. So we've been doing this for a long time. A lot of the knowledge, that we put into this and the capability has been built out over a long period of time. I think some of the key areas of differentiation to our competition is, being able to do what we're doing, but at the product, part, and site level, that part to site level mapping, leveraging our ability to sense disruptions around the world in a very integrated way is, I think, unique. But of course, there's always competition. It's also a hot space, but I think I believe we're the leader.
Thanks.
Question?
Yeah, I have one question.
Sure.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, please go ahead, Atanu.
Yes. Very interesting. I'm a professor of supply chain and and I also study risk management. This is really fascinating, and I've been following Resilinc for some time. One thing which is very interesting for me is the data which you get. One is from the external news sources. You have maybe your own reports, and you also ask your customers, let's say an OEM. But many times the OEM will not have visibility of who their tier 2, tier 3 suppliers are, right? So how do you create that map? Maybe they will tell you about their tier 1. How do you first of all, map this entire network, which is fascinating here. Many OEMs don't even know what their full network looks like. How do you create that map in the first place?
Yeah, great question. Nice to meet you virtually here. but yeah, so you're right. We'll never get 100% visibility. I mean, you can always strive to have perfect visibility, but much as in life, there's never a perfect situation. But what we try to do is get closer and closer to 100%. So whether it's 60, 70, 80% mapping of the sub tiers, the question is how do we do that? Well, as I mentioned, one element of the model asks the supplier to provide the information and also provide who their sub tiers are. Now, if they will not, because there are suppliers who will not, or don't comply, or just don't respond, then Resilinc can utilize our own, but maybe because we've been mapping these supply chains for these different industries for so many years, we've built up a database of these mappings, who's related to whom, or we have techniques to use publicly available information to which suppliers connect to whom. So that we sort of use these multiple techniques, whether it's our data, whether it's the supplier, or it's our data mining techniques, to put it all together into what you're seeing. But it's never perfect, never 100%. The idea would be is, any knowledge is better than zero, right? So
yes, absolutely. Then one related thing. Once
but you're
you've
right.
done
I
the
mean,
map,
it's an issue. Yeah.
Yes.
Go
Then the
ahead.
next thing is mapping. Also, when you are creating the impact that this supplier is supplying a single source part or this many parts. So this has to be really linked to the bill of materials of a particular product, right? So this product has this many parts and this many sub parts, and this part is coming from this particular supplier. And this is, if this supplier is down for a week, then will my factory be shut down for a week or so? And then you calculate the financial impact. But are you also able to
That's
get
right.
this kind of detailed bill of materials for every product, for each of your customers, and then map it to sort of overlay on this supply chain map?
So providing the part to site, let me go back to one here. You can see, you're right, we get the bill of materials and put down to the products and parts level. That's one of the, I think, benefits of us, but this is not required. So not every customer goes down at a very detailed granular level. They may do it for certain critical suppliers, critical parts and products, high revenue ones. Some customers are very mature of ours, and they do it for, even services, but to a certain degree. So, it really depends. They don't have to take it to this level. But some of our largest, most mature customers do. And you're right, basically it's a mapping between what I buy from which suppliers and where do those parts and products come from, and then which sub-tier suppliers provide them. So it's this whole connecting the dots. And then this is basically what you're seeing, and that's what we do. But the data is, it's never 100%. I mean, that's just the reality of it.
But one just last quick observation. I mean, sometimes I've also seen the companies are focused on sort of their critical items, A-class items, and they have their own sourcing classification, and they will look at these maybe top 100 sourced parts. But many times the problem comes with these really C-class items or not very critical items. It costs maybe $1. But if that part is down, it has a much serious impact compared to the other ones. Have you seen such things happening?
Yeah, and that's a great point that I didn't cover and expand on too much, but that's totally true. And in fact, Resilinc, we look at risk versus revenue, not risk versus cost.
Yeah. And
you're exactly right. And I may have a very inexpensive part that if I don't have the button on my cell phone, they can't ship the cell phone. Like, why would I use it without the button? So that button only costs half a cent, but they wouldn't be able to sell $1,000 cell phone. I have seen this. I'll tell you what's interesting is, think about it. Going back last year, if you didn't have a mask, like personal protective equipment, you couldn't go to the office. You couldn't have your workforce build anything. So the fact that a lot of companies struggled with personal protective equipment, they were shut down. And we know that stuff is not super expensive, but their workforce could not go to the factory, could not work. And that was the root cause of a lot of issues, especially early on. And then like, even if you go to your local doctor's office now, or you go anywhere, everybody's supposed to have a mask. And if they don't, they're not supposed to be there. So there's a lot of examples of that exact point. Yes, I agree. I see that all the time.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Sir, follow up on my previous question.
Sure.
In case there are suppliers who are already using your software, and there's an OEM they supply to, right, who also uses the same software, is there a way to directly interlink the data that's flowing in?
Yes, there is. So we have what we call an API, in other words, a system to system, so they can provide and they can also, we have the model where they can provide the information once to one customer, and then the next customer comes along, they want to share this similar information, they can then just approve them for use, kind of like we call it the LinkedIn model. But yes, to answer your question, yes, there is a way to, through Resilinc and automated interfaces to publish and also grab data out of Resilinc too.
Understood. That's great. Thanks.
Yep.
John, one question for the folks who are interested in data science, data analytics. Suppose you receive information communication from various data sources. How do you convert that into a risk score? What is the methodology, or what is you can just give a high level algorithm or what you actually do in Resilinc?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we actually have a patent on how we do risk. We call it risk quantification, but the risk scoring model not only takes into consideration the different scores that a customer, and some of these scores may actually, the data behind each of these comes from different places. There could be a financial health from a Dun & Bradstreet or Rapid Ratings. Geopolitical, macroeconomic scores could be from another source. So you can see different scores can come from, and you can weight them differently. But that's kind of the high level scoring. But this supplier, as we talked about, is then dependent on other suppliers. And so the weighting and this risk score is not only this supplier, but it's dependent suppliers as well. And so our scoring model, takes that into consideration. So it's not only the different scores, the different sources, weighting them, calculating the score, but then also where the dependencies are. So it factors all this together into one score, because, as humans, human beings, we need to be able to digest information. So the whole idea in the scoring model is to make it easy, but then also be able to, drill in, understand where the risks are. And I can see now these can cascade all the way down to at the part level and so forth.
So this weights percentage column, actually, how do you evaluate that? Maybe that's an user input, right? Depends on the business, it changes, depends on the company, origin, location, geography. There are so many aspects, the numbers change. So on what basis you actually get these weights?
Yeah, so a customer can set these. In fact, I was like, I forget what the scenario was, but somebody put in this endangered species. And I said, well, it seems like an odd risk category. And they made it 10%. And this is, again, customer can set this how they want it. I forget. Okay. It was an interesting story of, I want to say it was a food company or something where they, endangered species was an issue, but anti-corruption, bribery. Some companies look at, certain risks differently. Some weight financial risk very high. You can see this one's only at 5%. So, but it's very, easily, there's just a function where you go in and change the weights. So all that's very, easy to do.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Any questions from audience before John moves forward?
Yeah, I was just going to say, if anybody has any questions, that's kind of what I had prepared for today. I guess I got done maybe a little sooner than.
But, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah,
we have sufficiently long time now to have interaction, discussion, right?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, if there's any other questions or whatever, I'm happy to do it. But if anybody has any other questions in the future, it's Jon Jon.Bovit@Resilinc.com. So pretty easy.
Actually, I do have something that comes up to my mind. So for different countries, we know that they have different regulations. So some indexes you cannot kind of use one sort of numeral to represent everything. So how do you put that into account, like geographical location, those kind of things, like natural resources, weather, etc.?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So Resilinc's not necessarily the source of all of these. We are a source of calculating certain of the risks, like sourcing risk, but we're not necessarily doing the macroeconomic. These are scores that are either publicly available or you can buy. Our customers can buy and license from a different source. You can see Dun and Bradstreet. So the source of these different risks may come from different providers, but we want to put them in, aggregate, and combine them with the multi-tier and the part to site level. So that's sort of our value add. Not necessarily that we are the source of every risk, and we don't pretend that we are. So biodiversity, we're not a biodiversity company, but as long as there may be other companies, data providers that you can, customers can source these different scores from. And sometimes there's public available, when even today, if you wanted to get, lots of different data on COVID patients and, who's recovered and factor that in, you could do that. And there's publicly available sources that you could then import in. But that could be something else that we do. Hopefully that answered your question.
From a coding perspective, what kind of language do you use?
I'm not in engineering, so I can't really answer that question. Sorry.
So for students who are in their graduate school, what is your recommendation or your advice? How we need to prepare for any kind of job opportunities related to supply chain risks, and what kind of opportunities Resilinc has?
I think it's a good question. I think I would say if you're interested in supply chain, it's a great time to get involved. Because supply chain is a very hot topic right now, as we've discussed. In terms of, Resilinc has been extremely busy. We're always expanding and always have opportunities potentially in different areas of the company as we grow and expand. So there's always those types of opportunities. I would definitely suggest that supply chain is a very good and growing career choice. To get in is there's I think no shortage of companies looking for these skills. I would say. I'm in this domain, this industry, so obviously it seems very important to me. But I think it's a very hot space right now, particularly supply chain risk.
Yeah, thanks. Any questions before we wind up?
Yeah, maybe just concluding comment and question, and also thanks to you. So just final clarification, when you are doing this on almost on a real-time basis, every day from these news feeds and other sources, what you collect this information, then how do you create these alerts? There's specific action the supplier or your customer needs to take. Obviously, I know maybe this supplier in tier 2 is getting affected, but for them to take action, there are certain things which needs to fall in place, right? They must know how much inventory they have in hand, and how many days it will take for that risk to sort of propagate across the chain and affect that customer. Do you have the engine to do all these calculations before you sort of create that alert of what specific action needs to be taken?
Well, yeah, good question. So we do have a couple ways I would respond to that. So the first is that we have a whole team and technology and data science that figures out when and which alerts to release, to issue. What I was just popping up was we have a whole workflow to help customers, organize and actually have like sort of pre-done what we call playbooks. In other words, if it's a high risk event which has a single source part, first check the inventory level. Then and if you don't have inventory, then maybe we have to kick off a spot buy, or if you can't do a spot buy, we have to go find an alternate, blah blah blah. So we have a whole set of actions and assignments and tracking and different rules that we can create. So we've sort of created this engine to help them do that.
Yeah. So that means it is also linked to the customer's ERP, right? So you have access to the ERP data.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. And thanks to Inform NCSU chapter also. These are very interesting sessions you're organizing. I guess it's mainly for students, but I'm based out of UK and it somehow suits my time in the evening. So I make sure.
Oh, that's pretty late for you, right? It's about 11
yeah,
or 12.
But it's worth it,
yeah.
So thanks, Dr. Rattan. I think it's important. It's not only for students, first of all. I mean, it's a student chapter, but we invite even the practitioners as well as academicians. So your presence and participation really, brings some enthusiasm and, inspiration to students, especially in industrial engineering operations research programs. And of course, you have a good forum here, right? You will ask some questions and then the industry practitioners, they will answer that. So we will learn from that. So we expect you to continue following Informs NCSU and participate in all the future events as well.
Yes.
Well, it reminds me of my, because I work with quite a few colleagues in the UK and in Europe. So I'm always bothering them late in the day like this. So thanks for participating. Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much.
Maybe next time we should, think about participants in Europe and Asia too, so that we should push all these events in the morning.
I know. Well, we have a big operation in Pune, India. And so I have a certain time in the morning, or very early in the morning, our time, Eastern time. And then it's not too late yet for them. So I have this little window. And then once it goes beyond that, then they can yell at me, right? So yeah, no, it's a global world. So we're always all talking, So
especially during this COVID situation. Yeah, everyone is working from home across the globe. All Zoom calls.
It never ends. It never ends. Yeah, totally. It's true. It's very true. So, but no, thank you for the invite and being the kind host. Thanks, Srinivasan. Appreciate it. And just let me know if there's any other questions. But I'll sign off.
Thank you so much, John. Thanks all participants for joining us today. It was an interesting session. For more details, we will definitely forward the PowerPoint what John was presenting today. You can go through that. You can also go through their Resilinc website so that you will have some good ideas how they calculate all those things on supply chain risk and stuff. If you have any further questions, John is always available. You can come back. We will connect and then you can clarify all your doubts. Thanks for joining and have a great weekend. Next week, we have an excellent session. Don't forget to subscribe for it, because Raman is going to give column generation and Bendis decomposition optimization techniques using C++. It's going to be a tutorial, so it will be very useful for you to learn some optimization techniques and practice yourself. Thanks a lot. Thanks for joining.